You're listening to the 49 Carats Podcast, a 49ers Goldmine production with Stephanie Sanchez.
What is going on, everyone? Welcome to another edition of the 49 Carats Podcast. I'm your host, Steph. It is Monday, March 3rd, and whoo boy, do we have a lot to talk about. I was out most of last week, did a couple shows, squeezed some in there, talked about some breaking news, the Deebo Samuel trade and all of that, but man, there was so much that happened during Combine Week, as always, and joining me as always on a Monday to talk about it is Weston P. Smith. Weston, I don't think I've ever asked you, what does the P stand for?
Well, I don't want to give away the allure, right?
In my head, I was like, is it Preston? Weston Preston?
I don't think my parents hate me that much.
Phil. I was just trying to make some guesses. Paul.
Weston Paul.
All right.
Which I always said would be my stage name if I ever did something. I would just do it Weston Paul and get rid of the Smith. But
sounds like a bluegrass artist or something. Yeah. It fits. But Weston, glad to have you on. Like I said, we have so much to talk about, so we're just going to dive right into it here. The biggest news of the week, of course, was the Deebo Samuel trade. That happened on, was that Saturday, Sunday? Saturday. So, yeah, it didn't take long after, the hustle and bustle of the Combine to get something done with Deebo Samuel. And I was actually a bit surprised, Weston, that, they were able to trade him at all. I know some people were like, how did we only get a 5th round pick for him? I'm like, that's better than releasing him. They got something for him. So I thought this was pretty fair compensation, and I believe a win-win-win for all sides involved.
It's hard to disagree with that. I mean, first and foremost, like RIP to the Deebo Samuel era in San Francisco 49ers land. Shout out. We appreciate everything you did. Those of us been paying attention kind of has saw this coming, if you will. Although I'll be the first to admit, Steph, I was on the other side thinking the way that the end of the season looked, they were showcasing that he's still around, still part of this offense. But I think a lot of the impetus comes from his own request, not necessarily from the team's wishes. But I do agree, the win-win-win. And it's a tough pill to swallow. You invest a 2nd round pick on a player who's been productive for you, had one of the most memorable seasons of any football player that I can remember in my lifetime, and did in such a special manner. And you only get a fifth round in return. That's bad math. But the truth is, this was a player that, like, the contract basically said, we're publicizing that we're going to be releasing this player, and to get something for him is pretty prudent, right, at the grand scheme of things. And people will look at the cap and say the cap's a bad thing to swallow, and they're not wrong about it, but they did it in a manner in which it's only felt for a single year. And this is not going to be Bobby Bonilla for the New York Mets getting paid for 35 years after he retired, or some of even the other bad contracts we've had that have been on the books for a little while. So I have so much more around Deebo and just, my appreciation for what he's done and things of that nature. But at the end of the day, the business decision, the business element of it, I agree with you. I think it's a net win for both sides.
Yeah, and even the Commanders, I think he's going to be a pretty decent fit for what they want to do in the offense that they run. And a lot has been said about Deebo from the media, from fans within, the last year. We weren't all happy, including him, obviously, the way things went down in the 2024 season, his involvement and things like that. Even after the trade was reported, there's been comments about his weight and him being overweight. There's been plenty of that, right? Look, I just want to appreciate Deebo Samuel, the player that he was for this team. At his peak, he was everything. And he has similar feelings for, the 49ers. He tweeted this not too long ago, actually. He said on Twitter, quote, "49ers know where I stand with them, and it's nothing but love. Love John and Kyle to death. No bad blood, no way, shape, or form. They know I'm more than appreciative of everything they've done for me as a player and a man. Nothing but love." So he's in my view, he's taking the high road here a little bit because, like, I get it. He's seen the comments of people talking about his weight and Tim Kawakami on his podcast saying someone within the 49ers organization telling him that at the lowest point, Deebo was 20 pounds overweight and things like that. And he's putting that out there and a whole bunch of other things
sure.
that has been mentioned, right? And he could respond to all those, but I think again, just kind of none of that really matters because the two guys that matter, Kyle and John, he appreciates, and I'm sure we'll see some of a motivated, Deebo Samuel in the season. But Weston, I do think it's telling, as others have mentioned, the 49ers didn't seem to have an issue trading him within the conference, right? So I don't think they have any fears of motivated Deebo Samuel at this point in time.
No, I mean, I think they know better than any team what they have, right? Or what they had. I think, this is a big win for Washington at the end of the day for a player of that caliber to only have to give up a 5th round selection for when they are flush with cash because they're a really young team and it's essentially looks like a 1-year rental. So if Deebo balls, it could be more. So they have the opportunity to take advantage of a highly motivated player at a relatively low cost. So I think it works for them. But I agree with what you're saying, Steph. Like there was every opportunity for Deebo to, and this whole thing, the way it played out for both sides to walk away and keep this ugly. And he's keeping it classy, acting like the adult and the father that he is. Like, I don't need to go down that route. I got what I wanted out of this. I wanted a new place to mark my ground. And I get that. So let's just be happy there and recognize that, a lot of his success, a lot of all player successes can be attributed back to particular coaches and members of the staff that might have helped you along the way. And I believe very much so that John and Kyle always held Deebo in the highest of regards. And it was evident by usage and inclusion in the offense. So again, personally, just as a fan of Deebo Samuel's, sad. Obviously, my son is devastated. His entire room is decked out to Deebo, fat heads, and things of that nature. So he's a little wrecked, but I told him he can root for the Commanders for this upcoming season for a little bit.
Yeah, and I feel it. I mean, one thing that Tim K mentioned in Matt Barrows in their podcast was that he's a fan favorite, especially among the youngsters, right?
For sure.
He will be missed. But it was time, and I think all sides are pretty happy with how things have ended up. So with that, I mean, I think one thing that I think we were mostly interested in with the combine after that news broke, or after because the combine was all pretty much over at that point, was okay, well, now let's shift the focus to the 49ers may bring in as a replacement for Deebo. And when I say replacement for Deebo, I'm not talking about a Deebo clone. No. Personally, to me, that doesn't move me. I think there was a reason that Deebo, there's a lot of reasons, right? That Deebo's time in San Francisco didn't really make a lot of sense anymore. But I think one of those things was because the offense with Brock Purdy evolved to a point where they weren't dependent on Deebo's specific skill set anymore to move the ball. In fact, it wasn't necessary at all. They had no use for it, really. Yeah. Even when they tried to make it work and force feed him the ball. I'm not really interested in another Deebo for this team, but I can't help but notice some of the names that the 49ers met with at the combine, some of the players. Now, I will, before I go through the list of players the 49ers have met with, I do feel like I have a responsibility to, give a little more context to what these mean. So you hear about formal and informal meetings when it comes to players meeting with teams at the combine. If it's a formal, it's a scheduled 15-minute interview that a player has with the team. Teams can have up to 60 formal interviews the week of the combine. So think about that. There are a little over 300 players invited to the combine that week. Teams have to pick between 60 of them, they have to pick 60 of those players, up to 60, that they have these 15-minute interviews with. So I always say, like, top 30 visits is probably the most important thing in all these things, everything I track, right, in my draft sheet. The second most important thing I would say is these formal combine interviews, because there's only so many you can have, right? So to me, it holds a little bit more weight. All right. So with that, let's see who the 49ers reportedly met with. Only the names we know of. There are, I'm sure, plenty of other players they met with, either formally or informally, that we just don't know about. We may never know about. All right. So we got Trey Harris from Ole Miss, Savion Williams out of TCU, Jaden Higgins out of Iowa State. And this one just came through before we went live. I had to add it in here at the 11th hour before we went live. Isaiah Bond, wide receiver from Texas. Those were the 4 reported formal interviews that the 49ers had with wide receivers. A couple of informals with Juice Wells out of Ole Miss and Ricky White out of UNLV. So some interesting names. And Weston, I think like the one that a lot of 49er fans are gravitating to because of the Deebo element of all this is Savion Williams, because he did have a bit of that role at TCU where, I wouldn't call him a wide back per se, but, he did have some plays where he's out of the backfield and, similar to Deebo in a sense. So that's the one that would draw a lot of attention. But there's some interesting names here as well. Isaiah Bond is interesting. Jaden Higgins, I think, is interesting. Yeah. I wonder if they met with Matthew Golden. That's probably my favorite wide receiver. I don't think he'll be available for the 49ers to pick. I don't think they'd pick him at 11. I don't think he's going to be available for their second-round pick. But I digress. But I mean, Weston,
you run a 4.29, that happens.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that helps, right?
Yeah, a little bit.
But as far as like a wide receiver that maybe you're looking for the 49ers, like what intrigues you after seeing some of these guys at the combine? Was there any of those guys that stood out and you're like, I want that for the 49ers?
Yeah, sure. Real quick, before I just wanted to address like what you were talking about with these meetings, right? Like obviously on your screen, this is just the wide receivers that they've met with. They've met with plenty of other players, but I've always argued, Steph, I've been doing this with you, almost 3 years now. We've been doing this together where, I'm not a huge fan of the combine, but I think this element is the most important element of the combine. It's the opportunity for them to meet and greet in a formal manner any player that piques their interest, right? Or they might think they're fit because they might not get that opportunity and they don't want to burn a top 30 visit on somebody if that's not the case. So I think that that's just super important that they take advantage. Sorry, my son was literally running into the room like as I'm mid-thought, but I think this is the most crucial element is these visits. What I can say about the wide receivers is, wow, this class seems really, really deep. So I'm not really ultimately worried about missing out on the top 5 to 7 players at the position, because what I did notice is they're all big. They all run fast. And I do like a little matrix when I'm watching, right? I like, okay, who just impresses in the 40 and maybe who just impresses in drill work. And then is there overlap? And there seemed to be a lot of overlap, right? Like I thought a lot of them look good, but I think if you're asking specifically, I have my crushes. Jack Beck is at the top of that list from TCU.
Oh man,
he just screams NFL production to me, and not in a flashy manner. Just a
blue collar.
Yeah,
that's
you know what I mean,
blue collar type of wide receiver,
lunchbox to work kind of way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that he fits what they're trying to do, and he's not gonna be a day 1 pick. You know what I mean? A day 2 pick. I think you have an opportunity if he's BPA in that general area where you have some cluttered picks. You go at him. I'm big on Jaden Higgins too. It's hard for a guy who runs a 4.4, who's 6'4", and has the production to coincide with it, right? Like not just I technically like both Iowa State wide receivers and Jalen Noel as well.
Jalen Noel is
great. I think those are my 3. Those are my 3 of my 5 draft crushes. All the other names can be had really, really late, if not undrafted free agent. But if I think about capital that you will have to spend to get a wide receiver who's going to contribute immediately, I think those are the 3 that I have pegged for this offense.
Yeah, and I also want to mention, because I don't know if I made this clear before, these are only the wide receivers the 49ers met with at the combine.
For sure.
They've had plenty of opportunities to meet with other wide receivers, including the Senior Bowl, where I did get a chance to speak with Jalen Noel there, the other Iowa State wide receiver who performed great at the combine. He did say he met with the 49ers then. So, yeah, there's for all the names, all the players the 49ers have met with, make sure that you guys check out my 49ers draft tracker. I have a condensed URL now. It's a lot easier to remember and type in off the top of your head. It's a bit.ly link, bit.ly/49ers draft tracker 2025. All right. And if you can't remember that, just bookmark it. I will be posting it quite a bit as well, and won't be the last time that I'll be talking about it here on the show. But Weston, I do want to talk more about, players who the 49ers have met with at the combine, but I do want to stay on this topic of wide receivers. Now, you may think to yourself, well, the 49ers don't really need a wide receiver. They have Brandon Aiyuk still. And, they still have Ricky Pearsall and some of these other guys, right? But, yeah. About Brandon Aiyuk, right?
About BA.
About BA. This has been interesting this week, right? To kind of watch this unfold. So, even before, I believe last week, the week before the combine, I think we saw some reports that teams were interested in Brandon Aiyuk. Okay, that's not really like news, right? Like, okay, teams are interested in a good wide receiver. Slow news day, right?
Shocking. Yep.
And then on Wednesday, John Lynch had his presser at the combine. He was asked about it, and he gave a weird kind of response to it. Then, which I'll talk about in a bit. Then after he was speaking with the beat writers, they asked him like more directly how serious he was about Brandon Aiyuk trade. He said, not serious at all. Okay. Then on Saturday, Ian Rappaport and Mike Silver, remember, he is pretty well connected with the 49ers, having been part of the 49ers beat, last couple years. They both said that the 49ers are open to trading Brandon Aiyuk. Now, this still doesn't mean it happens, right? This is kind of on par with what the 49ers always say, which is we'll listen to any offer. That's my sense on what's going on with Brandon Aiyuk. Oh, teams are interested? Yeah, we're picking up the phone. We'd be open to trading Brandon Aiyuk at the right price, as is always the case around this time of the year. I don't remember the last draft that there wasn't a 49ers player kind of being dangled as a trade option for teams, right? And usually it's like, send us some kind of king's ransom for this player and we'll move him. That's the sense that I get with this whole Brandon Aiyuk thing.
Yeah, I don't even know a better way to put it other than name me one player on the team that if somebody came knocking with the right offer that you wouldn't move, right? I think everybody on this roster, quarterback, edge rusher, left tackle, tight end, running back, all included in this conversation. If it's the right offer, I think this is 49ers saying we're open for business, right? Like, we're not in love. I think the next portion of this conversation is like, hey, we're not in love in some of the decisions we made from a contractual standpoint and things of that nature. We openly, John Lynch's words at the combine in that same presser, we want to get younger. We want to get cheaper. I think they're open. I think they're saying we are open for business. If you're looking now, obviously BA scenario kind of has some complexities in itself that make it a little bit more difficult to move, especially what you might receive in return. But I think they're open to reshuffling this wide receiver room, obviously, right? I think they're open to that, but I also think they're just open in general right now of like, how can we create a little breathing room? What contracts do we want to get out from? Because we know they don't love the BA contract, right? But this is what happens when you wait till September 6th to finish something. That could have been done in April. But I don't have any other insight. I think it's conjecture more than anything. I agree that somebody calls, like, of course you're picking up the phone. That's good business. But I think right now, I don't think it has to be significant to move BA, but I think it's probably more in the 49ers mind what they would want in return, more than any team is probably willing to offer, knowing what the contract entails. And, oh, by the way, he's coming off multiple ligament knee surgery. That's my thought.
Shh, not too loud, Weston. Not too loud.
I can't believe it. I just ruined it.
Don't let them know.
But I'll be clear here. I'm not opposed to this either, by the way. I'm not opposed to this.
I'm not either, which I hate, but like I don't know what their plan would be if they did go through with it.
No plan. This feels like we're putting a bomb right in the middle of it.
Which I almost feel like they're comfortable doing. So
I'm excited.
Let me go back to the full quote from John Lynch, right? When he was asked about teams being interested in Brandon Aiyuk, it was the weirdest response. I'm going to just say the full quote here. Didn't have time to pull the audio. Forgive me. But he said, quote, yeah, that typically happens with really good players. You get calls and you always listen to calls. I think since Kyle and I've been here, we've been a top 5, I believe, number 2 cash spending team. So at some point you have to reset a little bit or at least recalibrate. You can't just keep pressing the pedal. And I think there's some good that can come of it. We need to get younger. I think we're the oldest team in football, and I think it's good to constantly get younger. Our draft class last year was a great move towards that, end quote. Like, dude just went into an entirely different topic that no one even asked about, which I think it's relevant, obviously.
I do too.
To the question, and the answer is just not what I was expecting it to be. But
I think it's more like, given the situation we are in relative to the cash spend and things of that nature in the contracts, is we are answering calls, not like, oh, you're calling for BA. No way. You know what I mean? Like maybe in years past, they're just people that are not on the table for them. Right. And I think now it's, hey, everybody's on the table. And this is why at the end of the day. Right. And it comes back to this, haven't been the greatest contracts. They've doled out a lot of money. The way they rework these contracts, whether it's extensions or even net new, it seems like they're a lot of money allocated in bonus and guaranteed right out front, which is not abnormal, right? This is the way the league actually operates. They've just been more aggressive in terms of front loading a lot of that money, then kicking it down so you're putting a lot of money up front and then you're wasting money against the cap down the road. Like it just hasn't, we'll talk more about this formula that they continue to use. But yeah, that did feel like he just went on a tangent in a different direction. Right? But I think he was intentionally trying to give the reasoning behind like why we listen to calls now.
Sure. Yeah, I think so too. And, Tim Kawakami as well as Mike Silver added a little more context and color to this conversation. So Tim K had this tweet that says, people are confused about this, so I'll keep saying it. 49ers money issue, as stated by Lynch, is not about staying under the cap. They've got room. It's about cash flow. They've paid big bonuses, cash on long-term deals. Now austerity is about cutting down on the cash spend. So again, ownership, like front office, like it just feels like it's coming from above.
Yeah. Well, it absolutely is, because the reworking and the things that they do and the cash spend they're directly talking about in bonuses and stuff like that doesn't hit the cap. That comes directly out of the owner's pocket, right? And the owner's probably sitting there like, guys, we've had the pedal down. Yeah. Right. And we've had some good results, but I don't see a 6th trophy in my locker case at 4949 Centennial Boulevard when I pull into the office in the morning. Right. Like, I don't like to use the word reset. This is not it's like, I think any good business does this. Every once in a while, you gotta self-audit. Right. And I think this is the self-auditing period, and like, where can they find it? And where could they reallocate and maybe catch lightning in a bottle with some youth? We don't know, but that's kind of my intuition on this.
Yeah. It feels like Jed is like, all right, I've given you an allowance.
For sure.
It's been a lot. I haven't seen a return on my investment. I'm going to cut down that allowance now. Like that's exactly what it is. And I get it. Like, the Yorks, Jet, like this this franchise is making a ton of money.
Yeah.
A ton of money. Still one of the highest earning franchises in all of football. All right. And that's not changing anytime soon. But that doesn't mean he's happy about spending all of this money. And so I think that's what it's come down to at this point. I think the Brandon Aiyuk deal was a bit of a, I don't want to say it's the camel. It was the hay that broke the camel's back, because I don't think the camel's back is broken, but I do think it's a snowball effect that we're all now hearing about this now. And I do want to, mention those of you that don't know, or if you don't tune into Grant at all, I know he's not everyone's cup of tea. But Grant, back in September, I don't know if you remember this, Weston, back in September, put out a video on Twitter that was like, he heard from someone in the front office or someone in the organization, 49ers, that they are not happy about the Brandon Aiyuk deal and having to have paid that much. And now we're hearing about it now. They weren't happy about the Nick Bosa deal and how much they paid for that. They weren't happy about the Deebo deal. So again, it's this accumulation effect that I think has happened, where the frustration has now boiled over to now it's spilling into these outlets where Tim Kawakami's talking about it, Mike Silver's talking about it, everyone's talking about it, and now you're hearing John Lynch openly talk about it. But before you say anything else, Weston, I want to say this. The most interesting part about all this, I don't know when John Lynch and Kyle and all, this regime had their hand slapped. I'll just call it a hand slap, because for now, to me, that's all it is. I don't know when this happened, but I do remember that when the Myles Garrett thing came out and Garrett requested a trade, all the beat writers were like, oh yeah, the 49ers will definitely be all over this. I expect them to be interested in this. And then a week or two later, I hear Matt Mayoko saying, yeah, I actually don't know if it makes a lot of sense for the 49ers. I don't know if they can pay that much money. It was a weird shift. And I called it out then, right? I was like, this is weird. Like, what happened? So I don't know if they just caught wind of it at that point in time. But the timing of all this, I think, is really interesting, and it's all kind of, we're catching on to it now.
Yeah. Losing's a funny thing, isn't it? It highlights so many wounds, right? Like winning cures all in professional sports. Winning cures everything. None of this is being talked about when you're winning games. It's just about player satisfaction at that point. The truth is they've never had their hand slapped, because they've done a pretty darn good job since the day that they've walked in, right? Taking a roster of nobodies and and bringing us to almost the promised land multiple times. Very competitive football over the last few years outside of last year. But I want to stay on this Grant Cohn thing, more the concept about these contracts. Steph, I always joke that I'm just not active on Twitter. I read everything everybody's doing. I just don't do my own posts. But after the Deebo trade on Saturday, I don't know if it was because I was a couple glasses of wine deep and I had my nieces and nephews running around the house and I was going crazy, but I was firing in. I think I threw the most tweets out in an hour that I ever had in my entire life. But the resounding theme was, why does this point directly back to Kyle or John Lynch at all? As long as I've been a 49ers fan and Parag Marthe's been in the building, all I ever hear about is he's the guy. He's the one who negotiates the contracts. He's the one who puts together the numbers. Oh, praise Parag. Another team-friendly contract, blah, 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 blah. Like, where's his culpability in all this and the money that's being doled out and the way that the contracts looked? I was told he was the wonder kid. And now look at this big pile of shit he's got laying in front of everybody. Last I checked, John Lynch doesn't sign the contract. Kyle Shanahan doesn't. They just say, these are the players that we want. This is the way the 49ers are structured, right? They got Parag, who is the negotiator, to come in. You're tired of paying out big money. Well, Parag, get out of your way and wrap things up in April. Stop waiting until the end of the start of the year when you have no other option. You have no trade partner, and one of your best players, fill in the blank, Bosa, Kittle, BA, is about to walk out, is not going to step on the field without a contract. So really, who's to blame here? it's not. I understand that because of these decisions, Kyle and John might be reeled in terms of certain things. But again, let's bring this boy who gets all the praise in the world when it's a team-friendly contract, who's clearly negotiating shitful contracts, right? That are actually hurting the team. I don't know how else to say that. Like, is that not the talk of the town right now about cash spend and bad contracts? Well, there's only one person who negotiates it all. And we know that to be a fact because it's been celebrated as such in the 49er world. So I want to know why he still has a job if this is what we're all worrying about. Sorry, and I should never say that because I'm sure Parag has a family and I never wish that upon anybody. But for real, like, you and I are judged on performance in our regular day lives, are we not, Steph?
Yes.
I'm going to start. I want to judge Parag on his performance. And right now, the performance doesn't look so good in terms of what he is compensated to do for this organization. Sorry, that's my
you were
bad.
cooking. No,
Yeah,
I had to let
bad.
you go. You were cooking. You was cooking. Now, I think it's twofold, right? I think both sides carry some blame. These contract negotiations have been super messy, super last minute
For years.
and just to end up paying the most anyway.
Yep.
So that does not look good. At the same time, this question from Joe: if you didn't want to spend that type of money on a player, why do it and then complain about it? Please, let's be smart this year. It's because there's two different decision makers here.
No.
There's the front office or money decision maker, which is Parag. And there's Kyle Shanahan, who's the player personnel roster decision maker, which is Kyle.
Yep.
And I think they're at odds sometimes. Yep. And it's coming to a head, which is a bit concerning to me because if they don't right this ship, if they don't win games, this is going to get worse, believe me. So to answer this question, I think there was a lot of people in the 49ers org that did not want to pay Brandon Aiyuk.
Yeah.
I think they went back and forth on whether they should trade him or not. And the report around that time that we later found out was that there was a trade on the table getting finalized to send Brandon Aiyuk to Pittsburgh that Kyle Shanahan in the 11th hour vetoed. And said that's pretty much what ended up getting that contract done and completed.
Yeah, but still in September.
It was almost yes, sure, yes, and that's what I'm saying. It's twofold, right?
Yep.
Both sides, I think, have some blame. There's plenty of blame to go around, but it's Kyle who ultimately put his foot down and said, no, like we're not moving on without this guy. And he does that a lot, right? We know about other instances where he's done that. Who else got contracts last year? Trent, Christian McCaffrey. I mean, I'm sure Kyle Shanahan gave his blessing and maybe even more than that on those contracts as well. And so I think for the front office to finally be saying, hey, like, no more, like it almost feels like, I don't want to say that Kyle is getting overruled or they're at that point where they may overrule Kyle. But it feels like it could get to that point. I don't know if that has happened, but
I don't know if it's there yet. I just think this is the checks and balances being played out publicly at this point in time. And I know Kyle has a ton of influence there, but like what I don't like is just what feels like this pointing the finger back at solely Kyle and John. And I'm not even talking about Parag, because at the end of the day, if I'm the head coach and I say, hey, I can't get this done without BA, well, I'm still an employee of the team. It's up to you to tell me to go kick rocks or go figure out whatever it is that you want to do. And that's the stamp of approval that you're talking about. And I think it's obvious. Like, Kyle, are you going to be a better team with Trent Williams? Of course we are. What kind of dumb question is that? Are you going to be a better team with Christian McCaffrey? Of course we are, dopey. You know what I mean? With BA, like, yeah, I want these guys. I need these guys. Look how it hums when they're all there, etc.
Right. Yeah.
But it's still the responsibility of your CFO, your chief financial officer, right, who does the negotiations to get it done. And I just don't. I think a lot of this is also brought on by the fact that they just continued in being caught up and being so cute And so I got you, player. This is team friendly. It takes forever to get it done. And it's a shitty negotiation tactic. And you end up losing money on the deal, and it could bite you in the ass. Nobody's saying a word about BA having a torn ACL and what his contract looks like if he signed back in April for 25 grand or 25 million. Nobody's saying a word. Nobody's saying a word.
Yep.
Nobody's saying a word.
It's true. We might not even be having these trade discussions.
That's what I'm saying.
With BA. So we'll see. And Benali in the comments here says 3 weeks ago the narrative was last place schedule, Super Bowl at home, all in year. Suddenly it's being walked back. Feels significant. To be fair, the people who were going with the all in agenda was people like myself. It was mostly fans and like content creators. I think it was just a lot of us, seeing that opportunity of, hey, like we could get right back into this thing, right? And we could be aggressive because X, Y, and Z. And now I think it is getting walked back though, because again, like I said, when the Myles Garrett thing came out, it was like, like they're definitely going to go after this. And then that got walked back. So I do think there was a shift somewhere, not just from fans, obviously internally as well, to walk this back a little bit and have the expectations be a little bit lower in that same sense, of John saying things like, we have to get younger. I think they realize they can't continue to run this back. Like, that's just not sustainable.
No.
It's sustainable if you win a ring. Like,
sure.
They haven't done that though. So I think you didn't earn the right to run it back as many times as you want and not have any consequences or not have, ownership coming down on you a little bit harder.
Yeah.
So now they're at this point where they're kind of forced to reel it back a little bit, which I think could be good. It's scary because I think it could cause some rifts and, you're seeing what I perceive to be disagreements, internally, but it could work out because I do think it could force Kyle to let go of some of these players, man.
Yeah.
I think it's a big step forward for this team to trade Deebo Samuel. And granted, that wasn't their choice. Deebo's the one that requested that trade. Not to say that they wouldn't have come to that conclusion on their own, but I still think this is a step in the right direction. You have to be able to evolve. You have to be able to get younger. And that doesn't mean that you're out of it. You just rebuild with a new core. You create a new core. That's what I've been begging this team to do for a couple years now, because I think we knew they'd hit this fork in the road eventually. They just, I think, tried to run it back a little, maybe 1 year too long.
Yeah. I understand that like the public discourse doesn't feel like a good thing from a fan's perspective, but just think of like your own personal lives, right? Without a little bit of struggle, there is no progress. So these conversations, to your points, that have needed to take place, they're just taking place now, right? And it feels even heavier coming off of a 6-win season. And then the core of what has made us so good over these past few years, like you're gonna see separate. But I bring this back to your point about the kid from TCU, the receiver, not needing to have, like, we don't need to duplicate Deebo. Deebo was a 101, right? And he was in the scenario. Kyle doesn't need Deebo Samuel or a Deebo Samuel type to make his offense go. We've seen him coach very prolific offenses in his career here without a Deebo Samuel type player, right? So we know he can do things that towards the end of the year, it very much felt like round peg, square hole, or whichever way that's supposed to go, right? But it felt like it was being forced and being jammed, and it just wasn't working anymore. I'm excited, like I am, because I just feel like Jed York has owned this. During his tenure of owning this team, they have been a poor franchise at points, right? And I know that he doesn't ever want to go back to that, especially when you have an organization that's being valued somewhere between $7 and $9 billion right now as a business, and you're looking to sell a 10% majority share. Shout out to any banks out there that want to back me and Steph in going ahead and purchasing that 10% of this team. But that being to the tune of $900 million for 10% of a
we
team.
can do it.
Yeah, that's big time. Like, you got to remember what else the 49ers or Jed York and the family have like invested in. They own Leeds United, right? Like they part of the stadium. So there's a lot that has to be considered. And that all comes from having a good product in the first place, right? To be able to do those things. So like the 49ers are never going to just blow it up, right? I think you have to be confident in some core players. Are you confident in your quarterback? Are you confident in some other people that are going to be there? And you're going to be able to compete. You're still going to be able to compete. This is probably on paper as it sits right now, barring catastrophic events like we saw going into last year. It's probably still a playoff team. Is it a Super Bowl contender? I don't know yet. I haven't seen it. But I know that, like, I mean, based off of how we finished the year last year, I would say absolutely not. But you change the tides a little bit. You change the course. You get some new faces in there. And I don't think they're going to be afraid to spend. I just think they're going to be a little bit more judicious about on who, you know what I mein? And what is their impact that they're going to provide to this team. And yeah, they might scrutinize a little bit more. And we might miss out on a significant player or two because we, you know, got a little cheap in the contract negotiation. Understandable because they've been burnt in the past. But I know there's a lot going on, and normally that would terrify me in the offseason. I'm actually excited because I think there could be some changes here. And I think we'll see Kyle maybe get back to just being Kyle and in there drawn up in the sand and getting it done and not playing favorites and not doing any of that. And you're going to blow up the offense. Well, you damn sure better invest in the defense. And I feel like they're going to do that in this draft again. And when was this team the best, right? Under the Kyle and Lynch regime, when was the best? When the defense was in the top 3 in the NFL. That's when they were at their absolute best. And I'm not saying we get back there. I say what I see unfolding is taking the strides to get back there. But I think even if you forget the draft, you trot this roster out right now, I still think it's a playoff team in the NFC, barring they don't go through what they did last year.
Yeah, I think you're excited because it is kind of going back to those roots of brick by brick, right? Like getting back to that. And that was exciting. There was excitement in that. So I think that's why we're all kind of looking forward to it. In a sense, we're a little upset. There may not be like a big splash signing this offseason. I think if there is any splash of any kind, we're hoping for Drew Dahlman. But, you know, aside from that, I think, there's a lot to be excited about. Speaking of contracts and all that, you know, John Lynch, of course, asked about Brock Purdy, how the negotiations are going. He said the negotiations have begun. The interesting part of what he said, in addition to this, of course, is, quote, "There's no guarantees that we get something done, but my experience has been when both sides are motivated, there's ample opportunity to do so, and we've been able to do that," end quote. So hedging a little bit, but this is also, I think, interesting in the grand scheme of everything we've been discussing right now, because it's like, you don't want to have another deal that pisses off your front, like your ownership and, you know, all these other guys in the front office. So maybe they are serious that there's no guarantee this gets done. I mean, Purdy has 1 year left on his contract. One interesting thing that Tim Kawakami mentioned was that, and this was in an article he put out today with the FSF Standard. He said, quote, "It's possible that the 49ers' initial offers will be for a shorter term than other top quarterbacks have received recently, and there might be more mentions that Purdy is under contract for this year at $5.2 million. Why do you think that is, Weston? Like, why do you think they might mention it more that, oh, we have Purdy for 1 more year? I think it's because that may very well be an option on the table, or at the very least, like they did with Brandon Aiyuk, they're going to say, you better sign this deal or we're just going to have you play on your last year on your deal.
I think that's the wrong card to play here, but I do understand why it is a card in the deck right now, because it's the truth, right? Is you're under contract for 1 more year. You make your choice, right? We don't have to do this. And hey, it's hard to judge factor in 2024 into the equation because it wasn't a good year for anybody. I would agree. This is not the one that I would play around with. I think the 3-year or 5-year contract is going to be telling in the sense of like, to me, that signifies like, do we have the right guy? Is this the right commitment? Whatever. I don't think there's any harm in approaching Brock and just saying like, look, NFL, shelf life is really short. We'll pay you a boatload of money. We got no problem doing that, but we want to do it over the course of 3 years. I don't want to do it over the course of 5 years. And then people are going to tell you, Steph, well, that's because he's not the guy. Well, we can have that conversation another day where there's only like 5 teams in the NFL that actually have the guy, but this might be the out that they're looking for. Because here's your conundrum. And we've talked about this before. If he's not the guy, who is, and how do you go get that person? You can't draw the two things together. So you're in a situation where, like, is my guy better than most? And is that the justifiable reason to pay him? And the answer is, yeah, it is, right? Because, like, is it going to get better? Don't know. You know what I mean? Are you good? I don't know. If you're playing competitive ball, it makes it really hard for you to ever get into a scenario where you're drafting Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen. You know what I mean? Like, you don't want – and this is the year where you have the high draft pick, and I don't want any of those quarterbacks, right? Like, that's just my opinion. None of them move the needle for me based on what we currently have. So stay tuned to the Brock thing. But I do think this is the one you don't want to drag, because now it's not just about Brock. Like, I understand the situation. Like, how do you interest any free agents to want to come to your team if this is how you negotiate, right? Like, if they're big money. If I'm a guy who you draft in the first or second round and you got me under, like, decline my 5th-year option because I'm out. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, it's not a good look.
As we're seeing, you can sign a contract and still not even be safe from trade talks, like with what we're seeing from Brandon Aiyuk. Yeah,
what I will say, is what's the common
not
theme?
Give me a good feeling.
No, not at all. It would actually really piss me off. But not that anybody cares, but I would be pissed off. What's the common theme that from the Deebo and Aiyuk negotiations and scenarios? Like, it felt very diva-esque. It felt like it really played out in the media and stuff like that. And I think that rubs the 49ers the wrong way. Right, wrong, or indifferent, I really do. Like, it's like, we heard about the bloodbath that was the George Kittle negotiation, but you heard about it well after the fact, right? Not necessarily like leading up to it. It just took a while. Fred Warner's took a while. Bosa's took a while, and they're not happy with it, but it never played out in the media. And I still think there's an element of them that, especially with the BA one, that pisses them off, because that started right after the Super Bowl loss, right? Like, that started right away and went all the way through, and they're like, shit, this guy got exactly what he wanted. He took us to the cleaners. You know what I mean? Like, and I think that pissed them off. If I'm being candid, I think that pissed them off, and I don't think they love this diva mentality. Like, they want Demos, who's out here recruiting players, talking shit on Instagram, just got the bag, talking about all these things. Like, they want players who are committed to the team, not committed to themselves. And I'm not saying Deebo or BA are actually that way. I'm just saying optics portrayed it that way.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely think that's maybe going to be part of the shift that we look for, or that we see with some of the changes that are going to happen with this team. But many more changes to come, and there already have been a lot of changes. Weston, one of the other changes that happened a couple weeks ago, I believe, that week that I was out, so I didn't get to talk about it. So I'll talk about it now. Changes to the coaching staff just a little bit. There were some new faces, some not mix-ups, that sounds bad, but some additions to the coaching staff, some new titles for guys. I'll tell you what I think is the most notable, all right? So Chris Forrester, who's the 49ers offensive line coach, and if I'm not mistaken, he was previously like a run game specialist as well. Now he has a title of assistant head coach / offensive line, all right? Now, other thing, Joe Graves, who's new to the 49ers coaching staff, has a title of offensive assistant / quarterbacks. Oh, we might be thinking, well, what happened to Brian Griese? Well, the question John Lynch was asked that, and it seemed like, Greasy had thought about being a coach and like maxing it out at 3 years, like 3-year contract, I think is what they had agreed on. John Lynch kind of described it as like a family decision, so end of Greasy's contract. He wasn't let go or anything. But yeah, so that's going to be a pretty significant change, because I actually thought he did a pretty decent job as the quarterback's coach. I feel like I saw improvements for Jimmy Garoppolo in that final season when Brian Greasy was there, and with Brock Purdy kind of emerging, and let's not forget, he was one of the guys that pounded the table for Brock Purdy, and so yeah, it'll be different for sure to see him go. Joe Graves again, now the quarterback's coach. Another significant one is Mick Lombardi is the quarterback's coach now.
Yeah.
Joe Graves is assistant. So Mick Lombardi, sorry, excuse that makes up. Mick Lombardi is the quarterback's coach. Jake Lynch, John Lynch's son, is the defensive quality control coach.
It's not what you know, it's who you know. Welcome to the world.
Who are you related to? I mean,
yeah,
this 49ers
thanks, Dad.
has been like the face of nepotism for for quite some time.
For sure.
And they also have Clay Kubiak, offensive coordinator. That one we known about for a while, right? That he was going to be getting that OC title. And so now that's official, along with all these other moves that the 49ers have made. So yeah, all in all, I'm interested. I'm interested to seeing what it's going to look like this season. Again, we'll see how quarterbacks look, how Brock Purdy looks this season under Mick Lombardi. And yeah, other than that, like it's should be a pretty interesting season. Now, Weston, to close out our show, I want to talk about who the 49ers met with at the Combine. We already talked about the wide receivers that the 49ers met with, so I won't go over that again. And to remind everyone, please do go to the 49ers draft sheet at bit.ly/49ers draft tracker 2025 to see the full list of everyone, all the players who have reportedly met with the 49ers through this draft process so far. There's let's see how many players we have listed there.
Quite a few. I have your doc open.
Almost 100 players. So definitely make sure to check that out. Again, we already went through the list of wide receivers. Let's look at some of the other positions the 49ers met with at the Combine. Defensive lineman, I think, is something the 49ers will definitely be drafting plenty of in this draft. It's deep at defensive tackle. There's certainly a good chance that they go defensive line with pick 11. So as far as their formal interviews for defensive linemen at the Combine, they had C.G. West out of Indiana, Shamar Turner out of Texas A&M. They love the Texas A&M guys. There's 3 guys on this list. Yeah. Nick Scordon.
They had a hell of a defense. If you look at some of these players, you're like, my God.
Oh yeah. I mean, you gotta go for the teams that just like breed NFL talent. Like you just have to keep going back to that watering hole. James Pierce Jr. out of Tennessee. Interesting thing on James Pierce that I've been seeing more of is that there's character concerns about him, so he may fall.
Can I say something? I'm the Tennessee guy, so I've been watching James Pierce for a couple years. This actually pains me. I was like trying to explain this to my wife about how upset I am over this, like especially with the look. It's not false advertisement, right? He has been known to have at times be uncoachable, and that he's just this superstar and doesn't want to hear, doesn't want to listen. And I would say that my own eyes told me he took a part of this season off in some capacity in mental preparation to being like going to the NFL. But when this dude is playing and he is focused, Steph, he might be the best football player in this entire draft. Like, and that's not an exaggeration. Like, I think if he had put together in 2024 what he did in 2023 and there weren't these concerns, you'd be hearing potentially his name at number 1 overall. And here's what's going to happen. He's going to get drove down driven down the board, and a playoff team, probably like to the tune of the Philadelphia Eagles or the Kansas
That's what
City
I'm
Chiefs,
thinking.
are going to end up drafting this guy and get another. He is a stud. And if you don't believe me, just go look at even the glimpses you saw at the combine with the speed, the bend, the movement, how fluid he is. He's a game changer if he wants to be. And it really does pain me that when we talk about him, because you heard it here, right? Like he's going to get drafted in the 23 to 32 range, and it's going to be by a playoff team who's going to have another embarrassment of riches. It's a shame. It's a shame because he's easily a top 5 player in this draft when he's humming. But if you got that's a big question mark right next to a player's name. But the rich get richer because they have the ability to take the chances that the poor can't. Right? Absolutely. That's what it comes down to.
Yeah, and so what I keep going back to is the 49ers aren't in a position to take any risks at pick 11. They just aren't right now. They're just coming off a 6-11 season, all the things we just discussed. They have to nail this pick. So unfortunately, I do think potentially, like I wouldn't like that risk, for example, for the 49ers.
Not at 11.
Despite everything you said. Yeah, at 11, despite everything you said.
No way, yeah.
Other players that they met with, although we don't know if it was a formal or informal meeting, just that they met with these players. Walter Nolan out of Ole Miss, another player who I love, but like also getting the character concern thing thrown around, although it's very vague on Walter Nolan. So I don't know. It could just be teams trying to get him to fall. We'll see. It happens every draft season, right? And then Shamar Stewart, Texas A&M, the uber athletic Shamar Stewart, to shut down the combine, man. I mean,
I'm on the fence with him,
athletic
but he is a freak. Yeah, he is a freak. But
again, same deal. I don't know if you can take a good faith chance on almost solely athleticism, because it's definitely not production.
This is the most prime pick the 49ers have had in a long time. Take the Trey Lance one out of it because that was earmarked to a quarterback. You don't make that move otherwise. This pick is insanely important, so much that even if you want to, you have to resist going for the massive upside. You need a day one starter with 11 overall. Absolutely. Day one starter. No project. Has to come in right out of the gate. Please. Is on taking reps with the ones at the first practice, right? That's who it has to be.
Because there's been so many times where that's not happened with 49ers first round picks. And I think we all would like to see that. Now, speaking of offensive linemen, also, I'm increasingly thinking it could be a possibility at 11, but only for 1 or 2 players, all right? So I think Will Campbell, who the 49ers met with formally, could be a possibility. The thing is, he has short arms. The thing is, though, with the arm measurements, hand measurements, they were all over the place. If you compare the combine measurements to the Senior Bowl, which was not that long ago, people's hands don't just grow. People's arms don't just grow like an inch within a month, right? There's so much discrepancy there that I think it's going to be hard for teams to really know which numbers to trust. I saw someone say, teams will probably just elect to measure, some of these guys when they're in for visits, 30 visits in their facilities, pro days, although pro days could also be like, because the team colleges themselves are doing it, right? But we'll see. Yeah, there'll be hopefully clear numbers that come out with Will Campbell. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, the talk was always about his shorter arms, which, obviously does make him a bit of a risk, because if he does end up being a guard, you don't take a guard at 11. So we'll see. But anyway, 49ers
screams defensive line. The picture screams defensive line.
To me,
the talent's there. Yeah, talent's there.
To me, it does. Yeah. To me, it does. Okay, so these are the offensive linemen that they met with at the combine. Will Campbell, LSU, Calvin Banks out of Texas, Josh Connerly Jr. out of Oregon, Josh Simmons out of Ohio State, Armand Membao out of Missouri, and informal meetings were with Holland Pierce out of Rutgers and Miles Frazier out of LSU. So For me, Weston, the guy that I would consider the most at 11 for offensive lineman would be Membao. I just think the more I've seen of him in terms of testing, he checks all the boxes. And I mean, I've seen his tape as well. He's a wall. The only knock that I've seen people have on him is that he plays right tackle. They think like it'd be more valuable if he was a left tackle. He'd have to move at some point. That'd make it worth the 49ers' while. Yeah, to that I say that's fair. But I'm starting to think he might not even be available at 11. Like that's how much he might have raised his stock via the combine and his testing. He might not be there at 11 anymore.
I don't think he will be. I think he's one that there'll be a couple names that are going to be. There's always players who benefit solely from the combine and teams saying, I can coach that guy up. And then there are ones that benefit from the combine because it accents their tape. And I think Membao is one of those guys, like good tape. And then you see this guy perform and move, and God, he just looks the part and looks like there's nothing he can't do for you on the offensive line. Dude could play guard in a pinch, like you find a way to get him on the field, and that makes him valuable at 11 because you can slot him in different areas. I think he goes early, but I think, another one who the combine has greatly benefited because it did more than just support his tape,
Oh yeah. And I don't know if you saw there's only been 4 offensive linemen that have certain measurables. I think it was 2 or 3 different thresholds that they passed that were elite measurements, right? Trent Williams, Tristan Wirfs, Will Campbell, and Membao. I wish I remembered what the measurables were because it must not have been arms if Will Campbell was on there. But Membao is a freak. So
that dude was cruising in the 42.
And yelling.
I was like, my God.
And yelling, which I loved. It's took every ounce of him to get that one, but love that. All right, let's breeze through these last few here. DBs. They met with Quincy Riley out of Louisville, Max Hairston out of Kentucky, who had the fastest 40 of this year's NFL Combine. Kobe Bryant out of Kansas. I am a Kobe Bryant fan. Will Johnson, Michigan, who's often mocked or has been mocked quite a bit to the 49ers at 11. Jacob Parrish out of Kansas State. Those are the formal meetings that they had with DBs. As far as the informals, they had Zy Alexander at LSU, BJ Adams out of UCF, and Tommy Hill out of Nebraska. They also met with Andrew Makuba out of Texas, who I love at safety. Don't know if it was a formal or informal, just know that they met with him in some capacity. That one does excite me quite a bit. This is also a deep class for running backs, Weston. And I hate to say it, but it's going to happen. Kyle Shanahan is drafting himself for running back.
I'm not mad about it this year because I can point to 5 or 6 whenever he wants to do it. You want to make me the happiest man in the world? Find me a way to trade up and get Quinshawn Judkins and add him to this offense. Oh, my God. Kyle, you can keep your job for the next 10 years if you can pull that off some way, somehow, without sacrificing the other part of the game plan, right? To slide up. But, it's a deep class. It's a very deep running back class.
And
you're going to have you're going to have 3 guys, maybe even 4 that go in the first round. When was the last time you saw that for the running back class?
Extremely deep, which I think will cause it some guys to fall, right? You're going to end up with incredible value in day 3, right? Guys who could have probably been a day 2 guy, early day 2 guy in maybe another draft. You're going to be able to get them day 3. It's going to be a great draft for running backs. The 49ers at the Combine formally met with Caleb Johnson at Iowa, KJ2, and they had a bunch of informal ones as well. Bashal Tootin, who was the fastest running back at the Combine out of Virginia Tech, DJ Giddens out of Kansas State, RJ Harvey out of UCF, and Omarion Hampton at a UNC. So a lot of intriguing players here as well. forgive me because I did not have a slide for the tight ends. I could have sworn I had one.
Another deep class. This draft is wild.
Decent. I would say it's mid heavy. So like it's like kind of top mid heavy. And then it falls off a little bit. I wouldn't call it the deepest, but definitely some intriguing names and some guys that I definitely like. And I think the 49ers would as well. So as far as who they met with there, they had formal meetings with Jake Brining-Stool out of Clemson, Harold Fannin Jr. out of Bowling Green. And they had, let's see, an informal with Mason Taylor out of LSU. He's one of my favorites. Also an informal with CJ Dupree, Alabama. Another Alabama tight end wearing number 82. Let's just hope he's better than Cam Latu. And then Colston Loveland out of Michigan, they met with at the combine, but don't know if that was formal or informal. So, but yeah, I mean, they're gonna do some due diligence on tight ends here, so that I think will also be interesting. We're starting to get some reports of some teams some teams who their top 30 visits are going to be. Like I said, to me, that is the most indicative of who the 49ers have legitimate draft interest in. The numbers show that. So keep an eye on that. Keep your eyes peeled. I'll be updating my draft sheet when we hear about, 49ers hosting any players. So make sure, like I said, continue to use my draft sheet, bit.ly 49ers Draft Tracker 2025 to know everyone the 49ers are meeting with. But Weston, man, we had so much to talk about, like I said, but we got it through. So appreciate you, man, and appreciate everyone that tuned in with us in the live chat. You guys kept it popping. Make sure you like this video. Make sure you subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. Audio listeners, leave a rating, leave a review. Weston, glad to be back. Glad to be doing a show with you again. I'll talk to you next week, yeah?
That's the game plan.
That is the game plan. And guys, for those of you that don't know, I also do the prospect spotlight interviews with NFL draft prospects. I did one earlier today with Paul Lewis III out of Akron, Ohio. Akron University, former Cornell player as well. So he's super smart. It was one of my favorite interviews that I've done this season with the prospects. So make sure you guys check that out. It's on my YouTube exclusively. And yeah, Papa J had some great questions. So I appreciate you being in that chat and asking some questions. Those were great. But yeah, have a good rest of your Monday, folks. For now, peace.